Hello again. Today I want to discuss one of my favorite video game series and kind of help people who aren't into the series or aren't into video games at all, give you guys some recommendations on what ones you should play. So, and that series is Final Fantasy. And Final Fantasy is pretty ubiquitous with video game people. Like, you know what this series is if you've played video games. But for those of you who haven't played it, it is what we call a JRPG, which is a Japanese role-playing game. And the difference between the Japanese role-playing games and a lot of the American ones is that the Japanese ones do tend to be fairly linear, meaning that you go from point A to point B. Like, you are told, go here, and that is what you're supposed to do. And you will have some things going on in between. You might have some side quests, different missions you might have to do, but for the most part it's very linear. And I personally prefer that because you tend to get a lot more story that way than some of the other RPGs you might play. And so I really enjoy this series. I haven't really found a bad Final Fantasy game yet. I mean, there are some that I like better than others, but for the most part, they're all pretty good. Just to give you an idea of where I'm coming from with my recommendations, because I have not played all of them, the ones I own are Final Fantasy 1 and 2. This is for the Game Boy Advanced. I own Final Fantasy 7, Final Fantasy 8. I also own Final Fantasy 9, but it's on the PlayStation 3. I don't have a physical copy of it. Final Fantasy 10 and 10-2, which I actually did enjoy. Final Fantasy 13 and 13-2. And I also own this weird one called Final Fantasy The Heroes of Light, which I've played a little bit of and I really like it, but I'm lazy and I forget to play it. So, as far as which game you should start with, because Final Fantasy games are not connected so much. There are some minor connections, but they don't impact the story at all. They're each their own video games, unless you get like 10 and then the sequel 10-2, but they'll actually tell you if they're a sequel. So now a lot of people's favorite Final Fantasy game is Final Fantasy 7, and it has a great story, and I really, really enjoy it. But as far as starting out concerns, if you actually want to get into Final Fantasy and you've never played it before, I would actually recommend Final Fantasy X. And some people might not agree with me, but the reason that I suggest Final Fantasy X is that, for one thing, the graphics are a lot better. Final Fantasy VII, especially in this day and age, might be a little bit difficult to get into because the graphics are not good. Even if you get it on the computer, and even if you know how to modify the graphics, it still looks dated. And most of us who play it for the story, and we understand that the graphics are bad, but you might get turned off by the bad graphics because it came out early PlayStation 1. I mean, this was the first Final Fantasy game that was in 3D on the PlayStation. And Final Fantasy X was the first one on the PlayStation 2, so the graphics are much better. I also think that the story is not, I mean, it's not super complicated. Some of it can get complicated, but for the most part, it's pretty easy to get into. There's full voice acting, which is also another reason I recommend it. It's a little bit easier to get into. And there's actually romance in it, and there's actually some payoff, which is a big pet peeve of mine in some of the other Final Fantasy games, is that there's no payoff, and it really makes me mad. So yeah, this is my favorite game, so I'm definitely biased. But this is the one I recommend, and not only for the story, but also the combat system. Most of the Final Fantasy games have what is called active time battle, which means that you have a little bar that fills up, and once it fills up, you can actually do actions. But while that bar is filling up, the enemies can attack you. And while you can set it so that the enemies won't attack you while you're selecting your attacks, they can still attack you if your bar isn't filled up. So what I like about Final Fantasy X is that it has what's called turn-based, and if you've ever, I don't know if you've ever played any video games that have turn-based combat, but what that means is that you have all the time in the world to make your decisions as to what you want to do, because they'll show you what, in what order everybody's going to attack. You know, like, oh, in 6 turns the big boss thing is going to attack, so we need to kill it before he manages to do that. And it has a different level of strategy, and it's a little bit better, I think, for people who haven't played Final Fantasy games, or very many video games in general, to get into, so that you're not going, oh my god, I don't know what I'm doing. No, it's fairly simple. You can figure out what you're going to do, and it's not quite so, oh my gosh. Because if you try to play Final Fantasy VII without having played any video games, you might run into some problems where you don't know the timing of it. And that's just my recommendation. Only if you've never played a Final Fantasy game before. I mean, if you've played Final Fantasy, you know which ones you like. So that's just my opinion. I don't really dislike any of the Final Fantasy games so much. If I had to pick a few, it'd probably have to be Final Fantasy 1. And Final Fantasy 1 is mostly just because there isn't that great of a story. It's the first Final Fantasy game. At least I'm not sure, because I know the Final Fantasy game order is different in Japan for the release order. I'm not sure if Final Fantasy 1 in here is the actual #1, but it's still a very early game. And so there's not a big story. It's just mostly about the combat and getting from point A to point B. And also Final Fantasy 12. I don't have that one, but I played it, and I think I just had a much more difficult time getting into it because I didn't really care about the story or the characters. I think maybe that's why I didn't play it. I tried so hard. I played it for about 2 hours, and maybe I just didn't give it a big enough of a chance, because so Final Fantasy 13, you got to get 15 hours into this game before you actually care about it, and it's amazing. I love it. I love this game, but it takes a long time to get into it. It's a long game, it really is, but it takes you so long to progress that you might not want to play it after a few hours. So maybe I didn't give Final Fantasy 12 a good enough chance. My fiance really likes that game. I don't have it, so I haven't had a chance to play it again. But maybe I was too premature in my judgment, so I don't know. If you have any recommendations as far as Final Fantasy games are concerned, because I haven't played some of them, I've only played the ones I have. Let me know if you have any other recommendations for people who haven't played video games before. Put them in the comments below. If you like my videos at all, like them, if you actually are interested in what I have to say, go ahead and subscribe, because you know that's always awesome. You guys are awesome, I think, if there are any of you watching this. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Final Fantasy games, and I'll do more video game reviews soon. Bye!